Now, as was the case in the general election, plenty of Georgians have voted early, record numbers, in fact, showing that the dire warnings over Georgia's new voting law were an overreaction and the comparisons to Jim Crow were unfounded, even though I've also said that I think they were fixing a problem that didn't really exist. But regardless, the turnout is good for democracy. The state set a record for most early votes in a single day on Monday, with more than 300,000 ballots cast. And Tuesday and Wednesday's numbers came very close to that mark as well, despite severe storms impacting turnout in much of the state on Wednesday. So who do the early turnout numbers favor? Reading these tea leaves is really tough. But a larger black voter turnout thus far suggests a possible advantage for Raphael Warnock in the first few days of early voting. Black voters have cast 33.4% of the total ballots. That's up from the general election, when black voters made up slightly less than 30% of the turnout. And based on polling, many of those votes seem likely to break for the Democrat, but we shall see. These early voting predictions, you never know. Early voting in Georgia wrapped up a few hours ago. Polls set to reopen on the new election day, Tuesday morning. The latest polls show the race is in a dead heat. Poll released Wednesday by Fox's Atlanta affiliate puts Walker and Warnock at 50-50. So will the distance Walker's keeping from Trump pay off with swing voters? Who's actually getting out the vote better? We're joined now by Andra Gillespie, a political scientist at Emory University in Atlanta. She's been tracking all the numbers, has her finger on the pulse of this race as much as anyone. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. All right, so what do you make of the numbers so far, and is there any way to assess who it may be helping based on what we're seeing?
Well, I would urge caution because votes haven't been counted yet, and we don't know who is turning out for who. We can look in certain areas and we can see robust voter turnout amongst African Americans who are likely to break somewhere in the vicinity of 90% for Raphael Warnock, and the fact that their proportion of the electorate is larger than their actual share of registered voters bodes well for Walker. But we have to add for Warnock, excuse me. Yeah. But we have to add the early vote and the election day vote together. And so overall, what we're going to look at is what the total sort of share of the African-American vote is as a proportion of the overall electorate. So if it turned out that most Black people turned out for early voting, but you don't have a lot who show up on election day, and it turns out that the Black turnout number actually ends up falling as a proportion below about 29.5% of the electorate, that actually is not going to end up voting well for Warnock, and Walker may take heart in that. We also need to pay attention to the fact that while Blacks are going to make up the majority of Raphael Warnock's vote, he still is going to need strong and robust turnout amongst Latinos, amongst Asian Americans, amongst liberal whites. Yep. And so in the general election, turnout amongst Latino voters was actually really low compared to other demographics in the state. So even though those groups are not going to be 90% Democratic, you still need robust turnout everywhere. So one of the things that I've certainly witnessed is that there's a lot of voter mobilization, more than there was even during the general election.
Let me ask you about that, because that's critical. Yeah. Is one side or the other mobilizing better as far as we know?
They are both treating this race as though it is theirs to lose, and so they are both doubling down their efforts. So I have personally witnessed mobilization efforts from both Democrats and Republicans, and that certainly has been more robust than what I observed during the general election period. Wow. And so, so I think they're both taking this seriously.
Yeah. And it's kind of insane, is it not, that the current and former president, the two likely candidates in 2024, are being asked to stay away?
You know, it is. I think it's a function of our polarized politics and how polarizing these figures are. Yeah. But at the end of the day, rallies don't vote. So even for his own races, my colleague Alan Abrams found out that Trump rallies actually didn't increase Trump's vote share in areas where he campaigned compared to comparable areas where he didn't campaign in 2016. So I think we need to kind of think about what the limits are of campaigning. It will energize mobilizers, people who knock on doors and volunteer for campaigns. They're good sound bites that come out of rallies, but rallies in and of themselves don't matter. What matters more is what these presidents are doing behind the scenes. And so if they are raising money and giving access to networks, they are contributing to their respective campaigns.
All right. So I'm not going to ask you to make a prediction because I'm guessing you're not going to have one, right?
The polls are still within the statistical margin of
Yep,
error.
I
This
know.
is anyone's race to lose, and whoever does the better job in voter turnout is going to be the one that wins.
Yep, that's.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.